Oh, yes. Awesome. Thank you, Casper. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first Game for Thought live stream of 2023. My name is Ali Weiss. I am our ethics coordinator in international game development here at Howest, Campus for Digital Arts and Entertainment, which we commonly call DIE. We started this Game for Thought live stream series in the fall of 2020 here at DIE with the hope of highlighting meaningful, societally relevant topics that are going on within the industry and beyond, and also will impact our students after they graduate here at DIE. So every single month we come here on Twitch with a different topic impacting our industry and society beyond. And this month I am thrilled to open up our 2023 schedule with debatably the hottest topic going on within the industry, both tech industry, art industry at the moment, AI generated art. So this evening, if you've never seen a Game for Thought stream before, welcome. I'll give you a brief overview of how it is going to go this evening. So we will start with a guest presentation. Basically, the goal of the guest presentation is to dip your toes into the topic, get a nice overview of what we'll be discussing this evening. Then we'll take a little bit of a break and we'll jump into a panel discussion. Where, as well, your questions are always welcome. Joining us this evening as our guest presenter will be Glenn von Waesberghe. Glenn is a AI and game tech researcher here at Digital Arts and Entertainment. So very excited to hear what Glenn has to say about AI generative models and AI art. And then we'll jump into the panel discussion. So joining us for that, of course, is Glenn, as well as Dries Deryckere. Dries is our major coordinator of our major game graphics production here at DIE. We also have Yasmin Marikar joining us from Canada. Yasmin is a AI cloud architect at Microsoft. And joining us from Denmark. So again, we have a very international group this evening. Joining us from Denmark is Lilia Satailo, and Lilia is a 2D artist at Kilu Games. So get ready for the presentation and the panel discussion. During the panel, remember, if you have a question, something that comes to mind with regards to AI-generated art, make sure to go ahead and leave it in the comments in the Twitch chat. Just make sure that you put a Q beforehand so we know it's a question. And we'll get to those audience questions at the end of the panel. Once again, thank you so much for joining. We are thrilled to have you all back for the spring 2023 season of Game for Thought, starting with AI-generated art. Without further ado, I would love to pass it over to Glenn for a very insightful presentation and more insight into what's to come. Glenn, I pass it over to you.
All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about AI-generated art, or in more scientific terms, text-to-image synthesis. Essentially, the idea here is that we can write a text description or prompt, and an AI model creates an image to match that description. Now, all of these images on the screen now were generated using one such AI model. There's a lot of ground to cover to give you a good background for this discussion. So first I'm going to give you a brief history of this technology. Then we're taking a closer look into how it works, while not diving too deep and keeping it understandable without having to be a math genius. Finally, we'll go over a bunch of use cases and examples of how this technology can be used. So to get started, today I'd like to give you a brief introduction into the history of this technology. Before we even get to image synthesis, I briefly want to touch on this. This is a paper from 1989 where the researchers succeeded in creating a system that could accurately detect handwritten numbers. This was a massive breakthrough at the time, and it might shock some of you to learn that this was already possible back in 1989. Since then, decades of progress has been made in this field. We've gone from just being able to detect numbers to detecting peoples, vehicles, animals, and so on. We've gone from classification to detection and eventually image segmentation. And even now, every year, new papers get released that continue to push this field forwards. I mention this because you can see that this is kind of the reverse operation of what we're talking about today. It's image to text description, and it's been around since 1989. That may lead you to believe that text to image has been around for just as long. True enough, researchers have been attempting text to image for a very long time. But the first truly notable successful result came in 2016 in the form of generative adversarial networks. These researchers were able to use a text description of a bird or flower to generate a matching low-resolution image. As you may be able to tell, the results here are still very rudimentary. And this is 2016, just 7 years ago now. And the best result we had at the time were colored blobs roughly resembling the text description. I mean, if you really squint at it. Now, notably, this only worked for predominantly birds and flowers, as those were the only things that we had sufficiently sized data sets for, with images and matching text descriptions. Finally, in 2021, only 2 short years ago, we had another groundbreaking paper. OpenAI released contrastive language image pre-training, or as it's more widely known, CLIP. Now, CLIP is able to predict the most relevant text snippet given an image without directly optimizing for the task. This means that we can provide CLIP with any image, and it will give a matching description without needing to manually add it. That means that moving forward, since 2021, we could use publicly available images, like those on the internet, annotating those using CLIP, and training more sophisticated models using a much wider and more varied dataset. This resulted in some first rough attempts by the public to capitalize on this breakthrough, including things like Disco Diffusion and Wombo Dream, which were able to generate much more than just birds and flowers. These new attempts used diffusion, a technique which has been around for nearly a decade, but which became much more useful when combined with CLIP. The details still remained very blurry, and the text description was much more so used as inspiration, like the dream name might imply, rather than a direct description of the generated image. While still rudimentary, these were the first signs of what was to come. Just 1 year later, in January of 2022, OpenAI, the company that invented CLIP, released DALL-E, arguably the first fully functional text-to-image synthesis model. Now, unlike their name, OpenAI may imply, DALL-E was not open source and turned into a paid service, limiting its reach somewhat. Google then released Imagen, an equally impressive text-to-image system, but theirs remained completely inaccessible to the public. July of last year, Midjourney was released. Now, Midjourney is a model a lot like DALL-E, but evidently trained on a dataset including more concept art and artwork, capable of creating more artistic work. It too remained behind a paywall, but already began reaching a larger audience. Finally, in August of last year, Stable Diffusion was released to the public by Stability AI. Stable Diffusion was free for anyone to use and fully open source. At this point, the technology really took off and entered the mainstream. Ever since, the technology has been evolving on a weekly, if not daily basis, with an incredible international community of people building off of this open source tool, continuously inventing new use cases and developing tools that leverage this technology in new ways. All right, so This technology is quite new, and obviously a lot of questions will arise from its use. So I think it's key that we understand at least approximately how it works. I'll be focusing on Stable Diffusion today, as it's the most widespread, free, and open source. But the general gist of this explanation is valid for most of these other models as well, with different nuances here and there. Before I even get to Stable Diffusion, I want to show you something more from about a decade ago, back in 2013. Back then, researchers at Google invented Word2Vec. Now, Word2Vec is a neural word embedding, and was particularly impressive at the time. The problem they tried to resolve, essentially, was how can we represent words in a way that is understandable to machines, and that makes us able to leverage relationships between words. Their solution was to train an AI to map out every word in the English language into a multi-dimensional vector space. Now, you're likely familiar with 2D vectors, which consist of an X and Y component. When we go to 3 dimensions, we add a Z dimension, and our coordinates get 3 components as well. Now, Google's Word2Vec used a 300-dimensional vector space, which means that every coordinate in this space has 300 components. So not X, Y, Z, but A, B, C, D, E, and so on. Once trained, every word corresponded to a location in this vector space. So every word could be written as a vector with 300 components, 300 numbers. The key here is that the words are cleverly mapped into this space, allowing for semantic and syntactical relationships. For instance, if we were to look for the word king, its coordinates, and so location in this space, would be similar to those of the words prince, queen, and princess. Additionally, if we were to take the words for king, subtract the coordinates for the word man, and add the word woman, we'd end up with the coordinates for queen. Essentially, the relationships between concepts are mapped out in this space. This type of representation is incredibly useful and makes us able to do a ton of interesting things with words. Now, this was Word2Vec in 2013. Now let's take a look at 2021. In 2021, OpenAI released Clip. Up until then, image synthesis tasks were limited to using existing hand-annotated datasets. That takes thousands of people, hundreds of hours to create. Clip, however, introduced a way of working which made it possible for images from the internet to be imported along with any text, usually a text description of the image, that is found alongside it. Clip, essentially, learns to predict what text description matches the visual contents of the image. This text description comes in the shape of something very similar to the multidimensional vectors that we just discussed. Now, over time, Clip essentially learns to write text descriptions of images from the internet. So now we have a massive, varied dataset of images and matching text descriptions, with the text descriptions in a format that allow for internal relationships between concepts. Next is synthesizing the images using text descriptions. To do this, we use diffusion. Diffusion has been around for nearly a decade, but thanks to Clip, we can now use this technology much more effectively. We essentially take an image, for instance this image of a dog, and gradually add noise to the image. Every step, we ask a denoising algorithm to predict which pixels are noise and to replace them to recreate the original image. At first, it makes a lot of wrong guesses, but the system adjusts the denoising algorithm every time, and over time it gets better and better at removing noise and recreating the image. The only information we provide the denoising algorithm with is a text description of the original image, generated by Clip in the shape of that multidimensional vector. We continue adding noise, and it gets better and better at turning noisy images into an image that matches the text description. Until eventually we can take a picture that contains only noise, provide the algorithm with a text description of the image we'd like to see, and it can create the image out of that noise. One of the benefits of this way of working is that if we keep the text description the same, but change the noise, we will still get a different image every time. For those who have worked with Stable Diffusion before, this is what happens when you change the seed of an image. It changes the noise it starts to create the image from. That also means that if we keep both the noise and the text description constant, the trained denoising model will generate the same image every time. Now, if you've messed around with Stable Diffusion before, you may have noticed you can select the number of steps. The more steps you let the model take, the more times it runs the denoising algorithm. More steps, generally, mean the image will represent the text description more accurately. Once training is complete, new faces, concepts, and art styles which the model was not trained on can still be synthesized by finding the weights for an imaginary word, which would sit somewhere between the other words that it was trained on. This can be done by using textual inversion. So when we use the name of an artist in a prompt, we're essentially just using their name to describe their art style as a shorthand. Even if their artwork is not included in the training process, textual inversion can still be used to create work in a given style. Also important to note, the algorithm never saves the training images. It does not simply compress the training dataset. The only thing it saves is that denoising algorithm, which takes the shape of one of these checkpoint files. It's always the same size, no matter whether it's trained on one image or a million images, and no matter how many steps. Okay, so now that we have some rough idea of how image synthesis works, let's take a look at how we can leverage this new technology. Here are a number of text prompts with their corresponding images, generated using Midjourney. Throughout this part, I'll be jumping back and forth through Midjourney, DALL-E, and Stable Diffusion, since each of them have benefits and drawbacks. For this example, we generated a set of figurines made of various crystals and metal materials. The detail that DALL-E is now able to generate is tremendously impressive. Remember back those birds, which were really blobby and weird? I mean, at this point, we can do essentially photorealistic stuff with DALL-E. Sometimes, however, you may not know exactly where you want to go and want to explore around, seeing different options and making choices as you go. Midjourney is perfect for this. Write text, then generate images, and then adjust the text until the images you get are more or less representative of the type of image you'd like to see. Then pick one you like the most, or that's closest to what you maybe want, and generate variations of it. Rinse and repeat until you get more and more images that are along the lines of what you're looking for, and then upscale them to get a high resolution. This is concept exploration. Another tool for concept exploration is remastering. Sometimes if you get something that roughly resembles what you want, but isn't exactly what you intended, you can take an upscaled image and remaster it. Now, I've done this here a few times, taking the top left image, upscaling it, remastering it, until I get a result that I like, and then continue on upscaling, remastering, until finally there's the end result. Now, in addition to this, once we have our trained model file, we can actually continue training the model. So the model that we download online, the checkpoint, we can use something that's called Dream Booth to insert new concepts into this. So for instance here, I've taken images of myself to add myself into it, but you can also take images of an art style or a pet or an object, maybe this plant. And you can see that you can add that onto the model and it's able to generate, well, in this case, it's able to generate me in all kinds of art styles. Now, let's look at a few different things you can do. The left image here was generated with Midjourney, which is quite cool, but you can tell it's a bit zoomed in. I'd like to see what's outside of it. So you can use outpainting and DALL-E to expand the borders. So on the right, you can see the updated image, where we can actually, along the way, change the text description. And so if we want a clock tower in the top right, we can just adjust our text description and have it generated that way. This is called outpainting. Now, I quite like this, but it'd be cool if we could see this in kind of like 3 dimensions-ish. So we can just use a different type of AI to generate a depth map from this image, and then we can get this cool parallaxing effect. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's pretty cool for backgrounds in games or other use cases. Now, of course, I mentioned games. There are a lot of ways in which this technology can be used for games. One way, of course, is just assets, albeit 2D images that we need for items in our game, or maybe even pixel art for characters, or backgrounds, right? If we need a scrolling, parallaxing background, sure, yeah, no, we can definitely generate that as well. Next up, you might be wondering, okay, can we use this for textures? Absolutely. You can ask it to generate a top-down image of, in this case, English ivy or rocks or leaves, which can be used for textures as well, and you can make them tileable. But of course, that's just a 2D texture. You can use things like Substance Sampler to make it into a fully like PBR material, which reflects in the right ways, etc. And of course, there are papers which specifically do this as well. Substance Sampler is one way. This is another. Now, DALL-E, I mentioned outpainting earlier. It can also do inpainting. So inpainting allows the user to remove part of an image and fill in the gap, which allows you to further customize the images you generate or remove details in an image you do not like. On Twitter, someone made this cool prototype of a tool that allows you to fix textures that may be missing or corrupted because of photogrammetry. Now, in time, this kind of tool will undoubtedly be used to generate textures almost instantly. Here, they've given a text description, picked an image on DALL-E, And then they have a tool which automatically imports the generated image into Blender, which adds the texture onto their 3D model. This is just one example of many ways you could use this. Next up, HDR panoramas. This is one of many ways you can use it, of course. You can see here that it's generating a full 360-degree image, which can be used for backgrounds or reflection maps. You can see here a few different examples. It's very detailed, and there's a lot of use cases where this might be applicable. So far we've talked about text to image, but there's also a thing called image to image. So with image to image, the video will showcase that we have a really rough sketch of an apple and a can, and so they actually give a text description of what they'd like to see there, and then they use image to image to generate a really high-level artwork based off of just that rough sketch and initial description. Here's another example of that with a castle, where they again make a really basic sketch, give a description of what they'd like to see, and then they get a really detailed artwork based off of that. That's okay. Image to image. You might be wondering, can we use this for video? Yeah, absolutely. There's a thing called EB-Synth, which is a tool which essentially is able to take a one frame and kind of smear that out over an entire video. And so you can take one frame from a video and then use EB-Synth to, well, use Stable Diffusion to change that into a different style, and then EB-Synth to smear it out. So here's an example of that.
Whether the weather be cold or whether the weather be hot.
We'll be together whatever the weather, whether we like it or not.
Whether the weather be cold or whether the weather be hot.
We'll be together whatever the weather, whether we like it or not.
And those voices were also generated with AI because, you know, why not? That's one way of using image to image for videos. Here's another. You can also use the thin plate spline motion model, which is a whole thing I won't get into, but it essentially allows us to also create these moving videos of characters in a very specific art style. This was done using MetaHumans from Unreal Engine. And then recently, we've been able to create entire videos from text description. So here you can see Image and Video, which is a more recent one, where they just give a text description and an entire video gets generated from that. Here's another one from Meta, Make a Video, which does exactly the same thing, text description to a full video. Of course, the quality isn't perfect yet, but you can imagine in a few months or a few years what, you know, could be possible by then. And then also, I definitely want to mention this. It's possible to use text to edit videos. So we can take a video and then use a text description to change something in that video. So for instance, here we can change the type of cake, or we can change the time of day, or the type of car that we're seeing. This has a lot of different applications. So okay, we can do images, we can do videos, but we can also do 3D models. We can take images, just 2D images, and generate entire 3D models off of them. Now, admittedly, this is still a bit wonky and the results aren't great, but you can definitely see the first initial results are already there for image to 3D. It's image to 3D, but what's also possible is text to 3D. Just giving a basic text description can generate entire 3D volume in this case, nerf to be specific, but this can absolutely be converted to a model or format that can be used for games as well, which actually the next slide showcases a Magic 3D, which is able to generate entire 3D models which can be used for games from text descriptions. Again, the details are a bit wonky and basic, but I think this showcases perfectly all kinds of use cases. So you can use it for images, you can use it for videos, and even 3D models. And this is continuously, you know, evolving day by day, week by week. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. All right. We're going on a quick break.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with, of course, Glenn. Glenn is here in person, sitting in real life next to me. Thanks, Glenn, for being here. We also have Dries Deryckere, who I mentioned earlier, introduced him as the major coordinator of game graphics production at DIE. We also have Lilia Satailo. Lilia is a 2D artist at Kilu Games, joining us all the way from Denmark. And we also have Yasmin Marikar, and Yasmin is joining us from Montreal in Canada. Yasmin is a AI architect at Microsoft. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at right now. We're going to jump into the panel discussion already. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. I've already seen some discussions going on about, for example, copyright, and we're ready to tackle all of those topics and more. Quick reminder, any questions, make sure you put a Q beforehand in the chat so we make sure to keep them for the audience Q&A, which will take place a little bit later during this discussion. Glenn, thank you for the intro to AI generative models. So Glenn, you touched earlier on the history of these generative models and AI art in general. I'm thinking, and something I've been hearing a lot, is comparisons with things that have happened before. And I'm wondering, for all of you here on the panel, if you have any insights, can we truly compare what's happening right now with AI generated art with any precedent that we've seen in the past?
I can butt into that, I think. I don't have a comparison. What I think is very unique about what's happening at the moment is how approachable it is. Because if we compare it to how the internet got started, it got started with mostly tech-savvy people that roll into it because you needed to know a bunch about computers. But things like ChatGPT, things like Midjourney, the learning curve is extremely low. All you need to do is to be able to write a sentence, and that is so small in comparison to be able to work with like complex kinds of technology. So I think that's one of the main differences in comparison to any other big technological advance we've seen.
Yeah, that's true. Although for most of these models, when think about Stable Diffusion, for instance, you still need a computer which is able to run it. And with things like Midjourney or DALL-E, I mean, they're still paid services, so it's not, that like it's pretty easy, but there's still a limit to how many people are gonna get started in this very soon, I think. What it personally reminds me very much of is the advent of computer-generated imagery, so CGI, for the VFX industry. I think when you look at the way the VFX industry changed, going from practical to VFX is a massive change where like people had to completely change their jobs and certain jobs just stopped existing. And I think it reminds me of that a lot. And it might be that we're at the advent of that kind of really large change. I'm not sure. We'll see. The future will tell. But that's what it really reminds me of, personally.
Yeah, and we already touched on, just from your answers, the pay-to-use system. So if you, for example, really want to create in Midjourney, just for example, that is not free. And I'm also, this is a perfect segue actually into my next question, the accessibility of this technology. Can it be viewed in a positive light that these are actually pay-to-use programs? For example, so we work in an educational institution. Of course, we have to think about plagiarism as well. And could it actually be seen in a positive light that these are pay-to-use systems and not technically accessible for all? Or is that unethical?
I don't really understand the link between pay to win and plagiarism. If you could just explain.
Yeah, I think plagiarism is an entirely different can of worms.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, I think anyone who wants to get started with this technology absolutely can. I mean, even if it's paid, they can still get onto it. But yeah,
I mean, Stable Diffusion is open source, right? So
I
yeah.
wanted to mention that there are multiple tools out there that are also accessible. So it's some
there's
of them are paid to like be able to prompt more, but you can try them for free, and you also have free options. And what I wanted to mention is that there is also the accessibility of training your own models, even if it won't have the same performance, but also fine tuning. So fine tuning would be taking a model that has already been trained on a lot of source data. And what's really interesting is that these current revolutions, they all kind of use the same billions of images. And I think all the debate is also stemming from that, because it's images that were copyrighted and just crawled from the web without distinction. But anyways, all this knowledge is embedded into models, and you could also fine tune, so specialize that, customize that for specific use cases, let's say architecture, or for specific illustrations, let's say your own portfolio. And I think it's really a different narrative this way, because let's say that you are capable of doing your own model based on your own art, and you are the one using it. Maybe it would make more sense, because you would have the control over what is generated, but it's also your own model kind of that you're using. So it's a different narrative, but I think it's also interesting.
Yeah, I think we have a whole discussion about IP in AI generated art coming up later, so I'll keep my comments on that for then. But yeah, I do think that regarding that, there's the data, like you just said, like this data scraped from the internet is really what for me the discussion is for a whole part about, and it's what the data that the model is trained on. I don't think the discussion is about the model itself per se, because the model is just a model, right? I can feed it my own art and get my own output, and that's perfectly fine, right? Because I'm just doing my own stuff with it with a model that I'm generating myself, so that's no problem. I think the discussion is really about where is this data coming from, how is it being scraped, right? But I'll leave the
Yeah.
more in-depth comments for later.
But yeah, for me, it may come to the first question, which is it a revolution? I'm a bit dubitative, because the latest advances in AI, it's kind of the same framework. It's feeding a lot of data indiscriminately, not really caring about data quality sometimes. So we have lots of work to do in the following years around data quality. But I feel like it's more like a super powered engine. So it could be compared to Google Revolution and stuff, rather than really something that goes from your mind to paper. You know what I mean? If it was something that really went from my mind to something that was generated, I would be, wow, it really represents maybe new ways to create. But when it's like just prompting something, and even if it's joyful, I find that like fabulous. I'm like, it's not really creation, right? Because it's putting something out there that it's not really what my mind has envisioned. So I think that's the main difference for me as an artist, compared to like software such as Procreate or whatever that I do digital art on. And that's the main difference with like AI image art generators for me. And that's why I feel like it's not comparable to other tools that accelerated our work as artists.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the prompt specifically, and I think I definitely agree there that there's a buffer there, right, where you're moving from the things in your mind via a prompt to the image, which means that you're not exactly translating one to the other. But what I do think is very interesting is yeah, you can just generate a image from a prompt, but there's a lot of tools being built upon that basic framework where we're able to essentially take like generate a basic image and then say, okay, well, the faces are a bit blurry. We'll just zoom in on that, give a very like detailed description of what we want the face to look like. Oh, the flower's a bit weird. We'll, continue developing parts of the image bit by bit. I think at that point, it's much more becoming a tool that you're using for art rather than, something that is being generated by the system. It's a very blurry line there.
Yeah, I learned from your presentation as well, because I mostly knew Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E, but I didn't really know all the other tools out there. So that was interesting. And yes, there are variations, and it also comes back to Dries' point. Well, I forgot my point. Sorry. I'll come back to it later.
It'll come back to you, Yasmin. I have faith. Don't you worry. I think it's been mentioned already quite a few times, and honestly, I think I want to jump right into it because I've also seen it in the chat. We've mentioned it. The idea of the concept of scraping, and also copyright. I think a lot of the people in this discourse when they hear AI art, copyright is one of the first things that comes to mind. And I want to know from you all, where are we in terms of the discussion surrounding copyright and AI art? And so in order technically for a copyright to be filed, it is said that minimum creativity from the human perspective is necessary. Here, I guess we miss that human perspective. And I want to hear more from you about that minimum creativity from a human perspective, whether or not a copyright could even be applicable to AI art. If so, how? Enlighten us. I'd love to hear more.
I would start it off with a question. What is creativity to start off with, right? Because that is really what it's about, right? I think if you segment the problem into the pipeline itself, I think we can come to an interesting conclusion there. Because let's say the people that trained and made Midjourney, right? They didn't scrape the internet themselves, right? They went to a service that does that, and they bought the data set from that service, and then used that data set to train their model. The thing is, the service that scrapes the internet and sells that data set doesn't care about copyright and IP. It just scrapes the internet and labels it. So if Midjourney buys that data set, trains their model, then sells their model, and you can give it prompts and get the images from that, right? Midjourney itself tells you you own the IP to those images because it's just ambiguous right now. There's no real court decision on it right now, so they can say things like that. The problem for
Or
me,
actually, they stopped.
well,
Now they told you don't own anything.
Okay, all right. So that
Last
I
update.
didn't know that yet. So here we are.
Thanks, Lilia.
But I think the
Updates.
problem there is the original company that scraped the internet and sold their data set. While that's where the copyright infringement falls for me, because they're making money off of other artists' work. That is where the problem lies for me.
Yasmin, it looks like you definitely want to add something as well.
Yeah, I want to add that's a gray area, and I don't understand why, actually, because I'm a data scientist. I'm doing business with like models and data, of course, and companies are really like, it's my data, nobody else can use it. And I'm like, I don't understand because when I was a student for research purposes and for doing projects, we were allowed to scrape the web, just for projects for educational purpose. And these kind of models were also explored in that sense. But then these companies are making that into a commercial product. And they're using these models that were developed for research purposes. So I'm really concerned about that. I feel like legal is not taking a stand, and I don't understand why as well. We've been talking with counterparts.
For you, when the financial element, when that commercial element is involved, for you, that is what makes this problematic.
It's problematic for that, and of course I have the same question as you, not even for copywriting purposes, but also intellectual property. Yeah, I'm like, what does this mean? Is the AI the creator? Is the company that made the model? Is it the one that provides data? So yes, and another problem for me is that, and the difference I would say between a human and a model is that the models right now that we're encountering deep learning, they're not accountable. They can't really tell you what were their inspiration or something. Whereas a human, you can interrogate the process. You could, and I think that's the main difference. And about creation risk, I wanted to add that I thought about that too and talked with others. And it's true that we have intuition, so meaning that we get inspiration from everything that happened before that we've seen. But I believe humans have inherent creation, and maybe one way to prove it would be that a model that has been trained on past data would be stuck kind of in what it has seen. and wouldn't really be able to innovate and or add new trains. You would need to retrain it for it to be, capable of that. So that really means that humans can really add something, like its creation itself. It's,
Yeah,
adding your own.
but that's for me, like, I am a bit wary about the whole discussion when it comes to like comparing human creativity to an algorithm. I
Mm-hmm,
think
mm-hmm.
that's comparing or apples and oranges,
For
because
sure.
like a model is just an algorithm, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's just pattern extrapolation. That's just all it does. It
Yeah.
indeed doesn't discriminate. For me, there's no problem in those models existing, and those models have a lot of potential for lots of different things. For me,
Mm-hmm,
it's
mm-hmm.
always about the data sets being used to
Yes.
train those models.
Yes. I
And
would
I
put a
think
Yeah,
limit there too. Yeah.
because
To
I
because
regulate
the
that.
creativity that has no meaning for me. It's not about creativity in this discussion for me. For me, about when it comes to
Okay.
IP and stuff like that, it's really about where does the data actually come from. Because, and I agree with you there where you said it's a problem when they start making money out of it. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
exactly, that is where the
Mm-hmm.
problem lies. You have these giant data sets, people sell these data sets for money, and these data sets contain not their work. That means they
So
are literally infringing other people's copyrights.
Okay.
so
Yeah.
Glenn
That's
is
straightforward for
here,
me.
and Glenn is dying to get in on this.
yes,
So Glenn,
absolutely.
go
Yes.
right ahead.
So,
Yeah.
Dries, you mentioned the people selling this data, and I absolutely agree that what they're doing, scraping the internet and selling that data, is not right.
Mm-hmm.
But when we go to the training of the AI model, because there's many ways you can get these data sets, and by scraping, I mean they can scrape the internet themselves, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think at that point, the question really is training these AI models using images from the internet, is that fair use? That is the question at the core there, and
Yeah.
that's a really difficult question.
Uh,
And yeah,
uh, from the artist view, it's not a difficult question. Really.
And that's why
Uh,
I'm glad that we have a very unique mix of individuals and
yeah.
backgrounds on this panel. Go ahead, Lilia, from the artist perspective.
Yeah. So artist usually has like much more bigger visual library. I mean, each artist saw all of the books, photographs. You have to study art history. You knew all periods of art, how humans art was created. And when you see the prompt results from AI generation, a lot of artists could tell you from which artist, from which architect, from which country, which photos use it with it. And of course, a lot of people, some of artists telling like, oh, that program just make a patches, it's just a smart printer. Actually, of course, it doesn't work technically like so, but if you have a really big visual library inside your mind, you can see like all of this like basic data in these images. Like you see all of these seeds, and even if it's trained or overtrained or undertrained, you still can feel it. And the
yeah,
main problem for an artist, like for example, I want to create something really new. And for example, I knew what I want. For example, I want Roman columns, and for example, Egypt sands exactly on this picture. And it could work because we have a lot of photographs and a lot of stuff created inside the internet. But for example, if I would tell you that I want to see, I don't know, Netherland plants, exactly some special plants or something. Of course, the models can create something, and usually, as an artist, we have, of course, sometimes artist has like really generic tasks, like you have to create a green grass or I don't know, blue sky or something. But if it goes to more complicated images and something like creating IP, I mean, the whole narrative story and the
I
story itself, it requires something.
I gonna partially disagree with you on that one. With the sense that I agree that definitely when you take a look at like really good artists out there, right? They will definitely make things that are way more creative, way better, way more interesting than whatever an AI can spit out. But again, I want to circle back to that. like apples versus oranges comparison, because yeah, sure, these AI generators, they're not as good as artists, right? Because artists can be more specific, can be more creative. I don't think that's where the problem really lies. These tools are just interesting to see what they're capable of. I think the problem lies in, again, where the data comes from and where they train that data on.
Yeah.
I want to bring that point back where I say, you have those AI generative models, right? Are they as good as an artist, like an actual trained artist with a large visual library? Of course not, right? That is, of course, they're
Yeah.
not as good, but
Mhm.
they're better than 90% of people out there, and that is where it's scary, right? Because if I pick a random person off the street who has never drawn a single person in their life, and they can just type into that thing,
Well,
right, and they will get a result, and it's going to be better than whatever they can create, right? So, but that I think again is not really where the discussion lies, because that's just cool technology for me. The discussion really lies for me. Okay, you have that generative model, it's being sold, but it's trained on data that wasn't consent.
yeah,
So
but I
And
think Dries, the problem is that it's the way the narrative has been going on. The artists were not really involved in this model creation. We didn't ask their consent, and now we have all these issues. I feel like if from the start they didn't do that, we maybe wouldn't have had this discussion this way.
but that's never
You
going to
know,
happen, right? That's not how
that's
humanity
actually
works.
that's a great point, though, Yasmin. That yeah, involvement in this discussion. Of course, there's a huge discourse going on amongst artists now about the
Yeah.
impacts of these technologies. But it's a great point that you make that in the formation of these technologies, were artists really part of the story? And that's something that I
They are
personally
not.
haven't even
No.
something that
Of course not.
we've returned. I would love to return to is the concept of fair use. I think Glenn, you had mentioned it a bit earlier. So basically, fair use permits, for anyone out there who is not familiar with fair use, it permits limited use of copyrighted material without having to basically first acquire the permission to use that copyrighted material. I think there's a large gray area, and honestly, for all those out there watching, there's a gray area for a lot of these things. That's why this is more, of course, of a discussion, just opening up a space to talk about this openly. Fair use. It's, by the sounds of it, it's very subjective.
Like,
What does one ascribe as fair use? And so I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to also hear from the chat what actually fair use actually entails.
For me, there's rules as written, I feel fair, like AI generative models do fall under fair use, except I ethically don't agree with it. And that's where there's a clash from like how the rules are written versus how it ethically should be forms in me. I can't give you a clear answer on that, but I think that's where a lot of the struggle lies, because technically putting a whole bunch of images through a generative model and spitting something out is transformative in a way, but
But it's not
uh,
just
but
images.
but ethically it doesn't feel right, you know.
I
Yeah.
wonder.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lilia. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
I have additional question. We can ask a bit in a different way. Does artist name are under fair use? Anybody
Mhm.
think so?
For the prompts, you
What do
mean?
you can you repeat your question? I didn't understand you.
Yeah. Does an artist name are under fair use or no?
So your question is an artist's name under fair use?
Yeah, like
So so the use of the name, you mean?
In the
yes, of
copyright,
course.
in
Yep.
the prompt, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
exactly. So the biggest issue, which artists of course complain, like when
Yeah.
you see how people use, for example, to get in a profit by selling prints and arts, with using your name inside the prompts, it's fair use or no?
I think it's
I
important.
not
suppose.
But
I think it's important to understand.
Yes, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say I thought about that because the issue with that is that they're asking for a specific artist style, so I feel it's wrong. And I was
No,
like,
but
maybe it could be a way to copyright it because maybe you
the
could
issue
say
there
that
is that an artist's style cannot be copyrighted. You can copyright
I
specific
think
artworks,
so.
but
I think so.
no,
In
you can never
Canada, I think
copyright an
style
art
is
style.
copyrighted actually.
No,
Okay.
you cannot copyright a style.
Are you sure?
I
Yeah,
don't
you
think
cannot
so. It's not
copyright
in
the
the US or
style.
Belgium.
Okay,
But
well,
how
I'm not
about the
sure.
name?
Okay, okay. Well, anyways, there's still query with the name, and I was like, maybe it should also be a way for attribution, retribution, because
Yeah,
If you know about intellectual property right and moral rights, you know that artist has the right to own his own name, to be an anonym,
okay.
to the connected, everything connected, printed magazines, all stuff, and you can use your imagination name as well in association with you. It's also under your moral rights, and moral rights give you permission to forbid everything everywhere where you don't want to see it. Even with copyrighted works made, for example, for companies. I mean, I'm about the paid work. If companies start to use it to destroy your name or something, you can tell them to stop doing it because it's your moral right. So, for example, if you draw something abusive or a company made it in an abusive way, you can tell like you can't do it anymore and it works. But with artificial intelligence, for example, a Matt Mustak, he told like, "Oh, that's not a problem. Like we don't
So
care about it."
But what if I draw
would you?
something abusive in your art style, right? And I
Yeah.
drew that completely myself, and it looks like it's your art style. It's not one of your images. I didn't trace any of your images. It just looks like it's in your art style, right? And I draw something abusive. You can send me a cease and desist letter, but I don't think you're gonna win that legal battle because you don't own your own art style.
So
Yeah,
Actually,
exactly.
it was really a nice case between, I forgot the name of artist, but he drew abusive illustrations which represents McDonald's.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but they
but that's
don't
different.
they have ownership over the characters of McDonald's and over the logo of McDonald's and
But
those kind of
this
things.
logo and characters, it doesn't look like McDonald's original illustration. It's
Yeah.
exactly
Then
like
I
It's
don't think
another
that.
style referencing the
And did
character.
they lose that legal battle?
at the beginning they won. Like I mean, they lose it. Like it was a British court situation, and the guy told like it's his artistic vision, and even if he using recognizable elements, British government tell like British court, not government, told like, oh yes, of course he can do it because it's fair use. But then it goes weird as usual, and somehow he stopped to doing it, and of course, yeah,
So
you can
I
understand
also
that
I'm
it's not
sorry.
so
I'm
easy.
sorry. Before Yasmin jumps in, I see Glenn over here. I think
yeah,
he wants to
well,
add something as well.
yeah.
Yeah, so at this point, we're talking about IP as opposed to copyright. We're talking about whether we can use certain characters or logos or things like that. And I think the reality is that no matter how it is generated, like if we generate something, if we draw it in Photoshop or if we generate it with AI, if it's infringing on that IP, we got an issue. and I think that counts for AI equally. But I think maybe to bring it back to the conversation we were just having about the artist's name being used. So would you prefer it if we just removed your name when we were trading, right? Because really, we can choose what we prompt, what text prompt we give with the image, right? And so we could remove all artists' names and then continue trading. At that point, the model would work just as fine. We just need a different way to access that image that doesn't involve the name. Would that be better? I don't think so. At
I
least
don't
this way.
think it's better, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
right?
But
I think Go ahead, Yasmin.
No, I wanted to say it comes back to the problem that the artist didn't consent to have its data in there, And I think the difference between this and the past snapshot filters of like become Van Gogh painting or whatever, it's that it's not public domain. And this artist didn't consent to like have the data
Yeah,
into the
so
training.
I have to say that we keep returning to the point that of consent, that the artist didn't consent to their work being used, even if some out there consider it to be fair use or to fall under fair use. I know we're talking a lot about problems and discussion points, but I guess leaning more towards solutions. How can artists actually give consent toward the use of their works?
I think
How
that's
would that look like?
I think that's almost like unsolvable, because I can add a tag like on my ArtStation, like, oh, you're not allowed to use this for AI purposes, but a scraper does not care about that.
Yeah,
It's
they
just
don't
gonna
care.
scrape my
Well,
image
they
anyway.
should audit
Yeah, they should,
data
but they're
and
not
be
going
more
to, because
transparent. I
yeah,
think
but
it's
they,
a big
yeah,
problem
but
in
they're
the
not going
industry.
to. This technology is out there, right? And we can, like, it's the same with piracy, right? Pirating movies
Okay.
on,
You mean in
like, it's
that
the same
way?
like with
Okay.
pirating movies online, right? If I can make all the copyright laws in the world, if someone online decides to seed a pirated movie and other people download it, like it's I know it's illegal, but nobody cares because the technology is out there, and that's where I think a lot of people are making a mistake in a certain way, because
Okay.
this technology exists, right? This is a fact, and the technology is out there. So
Yeah.
you can either choose to fight it, or you can choose to deal with it, right? And
Yes,
find
but you
ways
can
to
also
to to
choose to
try
do it
to find.
ethically.
Yeah, I
You
know. But the thing is, we can do it ethically, and we can all agree here that we're going to be ethical with these models, and we're going to train, when we train our own models, do it ethically. But there's 100 people out there that don't care about
Yeah, I
ethics
see
and
what
just
you
want to make as
mean.
much money as
Okay.
possible.
Yeah.
So
I think
the ethics is not where the discussion should be around. It should be about specific laws and how are we going to handle the fact that this technology exists and is going to keep existing, and this kind of AI generated art is going to keep existing, whether we legalize it or not, right? Or make it illegal or not, right? Drugs still exists, whether or not it's illegal or not. So it's going to keep
Yeah, but
existing.
well, I
So we
think
should really think about how are we going to use these tools? How are we going to learn to work with this being a reality? And because if you try to fight it, this is a battle you're going to lose, I'm afraid.
no, I
so.
hear
I
you. Yeah, sorry.
Yasmin, go ahead, and then I have a follow up question as well.
For sure. No, I just wanted to mention I totally get your point that it's not about gatekeeping the technology, but it's more about we feel like there's a wrong to be righted, right? And I was thinking of solutions more like on the industry side, that they should like be protecting artists and because artists are afraid for their jobs mostly. Yeah, like we always had people stealing art and selling it as their own or doing stuff like that. And for sure, it's another scale of piracy right now. But at least I would like the industries to take a stand and to come together with artists. And yeah,
Yep.
that's
Yasmin, I'm so glad that you
sorry.
mentioned that, actually, because it perfectly segues into my next question. Not so much about the industry, what should be done within the industry, but within education, within, a sphere that even comes before students enter the game, film, digital entertainment industry. We have these tools, and as it's been mentioned during the stream, they're out there. They
Yeah.
will not poof and go away. So I wonder, and it's a hot topic within the education community as well, how to navigate and use these tools, how to share this information with students, with an emphasis on how, and how can we have a conversation about the ethical implications as well.
I think the most important thing you can do as an educator is not fight it and not outlaw it and not ban it, but learn your students the reality of the situation, teach them how to handle this kind of technology. Also, teach them still the fundamentals, because I mean you're always going to need those. And because it's not because they like when they use an AI generator and we told them not to, it's not a case of IP or plagiarism, right? It's just fraud. They did what they weren't allowed to do. The problem is detecting that, right? And I think teaching your students how to work with this technology, how to work with the reality of this technology, is, I think, the most powerful thing you can do. Just outright banning it and fighting it in your educational institution is, I think, one of the worst things you can do if you want to create a future-proof curriculum.
Yep. I'm really interested to hear, Lilia, your input as well. Coming from a concept art background, within education, for example, we are a digital entertainment curriculum. How would you envision tackling this within education?
Yeah, I can easily imagine how, for example, programmers or indie developers can use AI generator to speed up their work. But if we are talking about current artist work and tasks, artificial intelligence will not help you because, as it was mentioned from the very beginning, you create the image and then you try to fix it. And the main idea and purpose of art is to create idea, and then during the process you make a decision.
Do you truly believe that AI art does not, I'm not even just talking about AI art, just broader than that, even AI generated anything, ChatGPT included, does not,
I
is
suppose
not helpful?
For not game industry, I mean, it's quite nice to make your face, for example, in the style of Avatar film and print at your wall. Yeah, definitely. But if you're talking about, for example, you can create 10,000 different variation of the helmet for an NPC you have, but you don't need it.
Yeah, but I think that's how you are looking at this kind of tools, right? Because the way that you've always been talking about it since now is just directly using the content it generates and maybe overpainting a little bit and going with that. How I see those tools, because I sometimes use them not in my work, I use them as inspiration. I use them as a creativity crutch. I see them as generative Pinterest boards. That's how I look at them. So I use it to spark creativity, to help myself be creative and help myself just think up some things, and I go further from there without the tools itself.
Yeah,
so
Lilia,
I think that's where it's interesting.
I see also. Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to mention that also, to echo Dries's point, I see a lot of our students,
using it
when asked about AI generated art, they actually respond with a similar answer that it's helpful in terms of creativity. I know this is very much in line with concepting and concept art. So I want to hear your response to that.
Yeah, so as I told, like, of course, it could be really nice inspiration, for example, for game designer to create something they want. The main idea why it's still, you can use it for combine some words and create the generated image and took it as an inspiration as a part of your mood board. For example, if you can't yet, for example, combine, I don't know, two different architectural style into once in your mind, you can try to use Midjourney and combine it. It would work. You can see how it will work really fast. But the idea of thinking process, which requires for real tasks, yes, exactly. So you can't use it during the work progress because you still have to show sketches and explain how it's supposed to work. For example, I started to check this artificial tool since it was disco diffusion, since it was a university project. And now as well, of course, I'm still thinking and looking how it works. And I saw some some people told like really ethic ideas, like turning sketch into final render, which hypothetically looks really nice because it can speed up for a lot of people boring part when you have to polish everything and make it nice. But the problem that, at least at this stage, artificial intelligence can't recognize details you're drawing inside the image. For example, if you try and make a design for, I don't know, a bicycle, character on the bicycle, you make design for the bicycle, for the helm on a character, and then you turn the sketch into rendered images. Artificial intelligence just replace this random noise ornaments recognizable like elements from these technical parts, but from the technical part, it doesn't work. For example, 3D modeler could kill you for this render because it doesn't make any sense. It will not work for him, and he have to make a sketch for himself to explain how it's supposed to work.
But that's just a technical limitation of the
Yeah.
model right now, right? If we think
Yeah.
5 to 6 years in the future and
Maybe,
it is able to make a very accurate, correct representation that is usable, what then, right? I think we should be really thinking about that because this technology is 6 years old. What is it going to be in 6 years, right?
Yeah.
Not even.
So Glenn says not even because yep, that is it's all happening very fast. And actually, before this stream even started, we said we were talking about we were on vacation last week. We had intersemestrial holiday, and we were talking with Yasmin, and she brought something up that she saw in an article, and Glenn and I were sitting here, and
it's going
we
so
hadn't
fast.
heard of it.
Yeah.
So it's really quickly evolving on a daily basis. More things are coming out about this as well. I do have to say I'm looking at the time and I think it's a perfect opportunity to head on over to the chat questions. Thank you so much for submitting so many questions in the chat. I see it's very active in there, which is always lovely to see. I see, Casper, I'm going to ask you to scroll down a little bit, please, if you don't mind. Scroll down just a little bit more. Yes, so I see an interesting question from Freeze B. He asks, how is using generated AI art different from using photographs to create artworks? So the difference between using, I would say, more fine art as composed to photography.
It's a very interesting question because I wanted to bring that up earlier as well. I just didn't get to it because some people like to compare it to you take a bunch of pictures and you photo bash it together, and then if you make a photo bash, is that transformative enough? I get the comparison. I feel that we have to make a little bit of a distinction though with generative art, that it's not really taking pictures and doing something with that, right? It's using a latent space and just generating stuff out of noise, out of nothingness. And that's where there's a fundamental difference in the way the approach lies. Because you cannot ask a AI generative AI, what images did you use? What images did you inspire this image on? You can't ask that AI because it's all the images, right, at the same time.
Yeah,
And
the impact of every single image is so
Yeah.
infinitesimally small.
Yes, exactly.
Yasmin, go ahead. I see you wanted to
agree,
add
but
something.
I also wanted to say that I don't know if on your side it did this, but it was Midjourney V3. But at the time and even today, I can often recognize that something was AI generated. So I still feel like, and we didn't bring that up in the conversation, but something philosophically that I find interesting is I think we should really teach critical thinking to students, definitely in using this, because I think they still need to develop their skills outside of it, because if you are over reliant on this, you can restrict your vision a lot. I've been using it, and it was a bit frustrating to me that okay, I mean, it's perfect, it's awesome. At first I was joyful, but I was also like, oh, I can recognize its style. It's restricting my vision. It's not exactly what I had in mind. So I'm afraid of a world where on the internet you have everything that is AI generated, like text, images, and you can't like identify
Right.
anything and enjoy anything because everything is like, enjoyment comes also from specificity.
That's
And
actually a very
that's
good
also
point.
something I wanted
Yep.
to converse with you. I know we don't have much time, but it's interesting because you're all from the industry. Is that I feel like we have the same trend in other industries. Like for instance, I love the cartoons I watched when I was younger, to the animation and stuff. And today, because we want to be more productive, um, as I want to make money, they always use the same 3D models, and it sucks. And I'm like, why do they make remakes? We had so the industry was so good before, and I feel like it's becoming the same with video game. We are over reliant on quantity over quality as well, so they try to make the same games that's oversell before. Anyways, that's another topic entirely, but I feel like it's a bit linked with why we are so reluctant to also be over reliant on this AI hype, and why I'm
Right.
afraid for the future generations that even ChatGPT, you need to be critical because it spouts nonsense sometimes. It's a
People
good
can
body to
still
have,
write
but
since the invention of the printing press, right? So it's not because AI is generating stuff that we will
you
never be
say
able to
that,
draw
but
again,
did you know that some kids don't read, or they're at school and they do that because they think they're in front of an iPad?
but there's
You
still
never
kids
know
that didn't
how
read
they
back then
same
either.
thing
So
is,
So Dries, you mentioned something as the printing press.
yes,
I'm also seeing in the chat a conversation about naturally how things evolve over time. Also, I think during this conversation, but inevitably, I think this is what this conversation is about right now. Not so much positive outlook, solution oriented. I am wondering, and I also see a question in the chat surrounding the beneficial aspects of this technology. Is it, how can you view it in a positive way? And if not, I would love to hear further.
I already mentioned on it, like it's a good crutch for creativity in certain aspects. This kind of ties into a conversation I had earlier with a colleague of mine, and I thought it was a very interesting point they brought up. They said they're just automating the wrong damn things. Stop automating the fun parts. Just automate unwrapping for me, please, instead, instead of the painting aspect, for example. And what is the good thing behind this? This technology is getting more widespread, and because it now has a lot of attention to it, I feel like this kind of technology being applied to other aspects, more boring aspects that we don't like and that we don't find fun. I think once we find a solution for these kinds of problems, like for example, easier unwrapping or just like detail asphalt placement in certain environments. For example, if I have to place 100 rocks in a level, maybe it's instead of painting it around, maybe you can let an AI do it, for example. So I think that's where the positivity lies. And I think it makes a lot of sense that there's so much pushback from the artist industry regarding things like generative AI, because we're automating the wrong damn thing there, so to speak.
I see also a question from It's Gur in the chat. Netflix recently released the short film Dog and Boy, where the backgrounds for the animated film were AI generated. The Netflix Japan Twitter claimed that AI was used due to a labor shortage. That is in quotation marks. A more likely explanation is that it was even cheaper to use the AI as opposed to paying already critically underpaid artists to create the art. What is the risk of corporations using the existence of AI to pressure existing artists into even less pay under the threat of replacement by this technology? Would anyone like to? That's
It's a
really,
really hefty question there.
It's a hefty question, but a wonderful question. So it's basically touching on using AI due to a labor shortage. Is it a more likely explanation that it was cheaper to use AI rather than paying?
I mean, it makes sense to me.
Perhaps underpaid artists.
And that's where a lot of people get very afraid, right? Where are our jobs going to go? Because as an artist, right? If you're a concept artist, if you are or even a matte painter or something, you make these kinds of backgrounds for these kinds of animated series, animated shows, and then is your job going to disappear? Yes and no. I do believe that there's going to be less people needed, less work, man hours needed for this kind of work. Is it going to completely disappear? I don't think so, right? We still ride horses since the invention of the car, but it's still going to, there's always going to be a human aspect in there somewhere, because we're always going to keep pushing the technology to the limits as humans. But I do believe that there's going to be a shrinkage in certain jobs, amounts in certain fields. I do think, however, that this creates space for other kind of specialists, right? Because the people that generate those backgrounds need to be able to work with the software, right? The people who make those models need to make those models. So there's, I think, going to be a shift, not necessarily just a removal of jobs, but I think there's going to be a shift from one
Yeah,
space
I
into
see in the
another.
chat, and then I see Lilia. I think you want to add something as well. I see in the chat a really interesting comment. It's going to be like portrait painting after photography. It's going to be a luxury. Lilia, I see that you wanted to add something, and then I'll pass it over to Glenn.
If we are talking exactly about situation with Netflix, they probably save a lot on marketing for exactly this movie. Because if you check the latest news, I forgot which company, they publicly told that they will fire a lot of journalists from their department and replace them with DPA. And after it, their stocks rise for 2000% or something.
Wow.
Yeah,
Right.
so that's totally different question and probably not connected to only artificial intelligence.
But alas, an interesting point in terms of marketing. Glenn.
Yeah, I do want to pitch in on what Dries just said on the jobs, and specifically on this question as well of jobs disappearing because of this technology. And I think it's important to notice, well, let's say we're talking about an animated movie, right? We're always going to be working in a specific art style with specific characters. And those are things that are still very difficult for a AI model to do consistently. What we can do, however, is we can have real artists create a subset, let's say 10 or 20 images in a specific art style, and then train our AI model to work in that art style. Similarly, we can make images of a character and then teach it what that character looks like. So we can use real artists to then train our AI model and to continue working there. So I don't think the jobs are going to completely disappear.
Yeah,
but I think a lot of the monkey work is.
But then
I
what
totally
happens
understand.
next?
But I heard about an artist that was fired, and they used the images they've illustrated to train a model, actually. So
Yeah, but that
you
makes
know,
sense because if you are an
Without
artist working
her
for a
consent.
company, the company owns your artwork.
owns the art. Yeah,
She was
yeah.
a freelancer,
They're allowed to do that.
so it's different situation.
So
If
yeah,
I make,
okay.
when I worked at a company and made models for the game I was working on, I don't own those models, right?
But I
Yes,
think
if you're a full-time employee, yes, but if you're a freelancer, you give a license for exact use of your work you've done for them. And she was a freelancer, and it's
But
totally
yeah,
different.
Okay,
so
that's a good point actually that you're
but
making.
it could change the time they take to make a project and
Yeah.
It's a
Alright.
good point about the freelancer thing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely,
because
I think.
for example, I can tell us I worked on freelance a lot, and for example, I drew some illustration for the board game, and they bought this illustration to be printed only in board game for advertising and for marketing stuff, and print their player book, player guide. That's all. If they would like to start to sell prints with this illustration, they have to pay me in addition to use it in a different license view.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense.
I see
But
another
with the
question in the.
companies, that could be really cruel. Yeah. Don't work in a bad company.
What is a
I
bad
see.
company?
I see another in the another question in the chat. Rather, there is a Blender extension that can texture entire scenes with a text prompt using SD, Stable Diffusion. While such tools have been obvious game dev implications, since such tools have obvious game dev implications, I wonder which industry is driving these innovations the hardest.
That's actually interesting question as well, because still I could gather proofs after our stream. It was a fun story about, I didn't remember, was it with Mass Effect or, oh my god, I forgot. But you can find a book with a lot of photo texture by the photographer, and she just make like a lot of books, I suppose up to 10, with the textures, and these books using like guides for game development of making textures and all this stuff. And one of game dev employee from the famous company, he used texture from these books, and the author, she recognized it in this game, like her own property, intellectual property as the photos, and she sued them for a lot of money. It was over than $1 million for it. And probably it just, as I mentioned before, a really fun situation with plagiarism in generators, because you can use abstractive prompt but still get plagiarized recognizable result. It was in the internet a lot of stories. For example, if you ask in a prompt like to draw Afghan girl, you're getting exactly the famous photography of Afghan girl.
Have you tried that? Have you actually tried that? Because I have, and I don't think that's real. I've seen that going around, and I think that's a hoax, to be honest with you, personally. I might be wrong, and I'd love to be corrected, but I don't think that one is specifically correct. I mean, I've tried this a few times. Try and recreate A Starry Night by Van Gogh or any other famous painting. It is really hard to do. It's possible, I'm sure, if you really try, but it's not that simple. It really isn't.
But I guess it depends on the model, right?
It worked last spring. It's worked.
Okay.
I suppose they started to ban words, I suppose, since August or something, when it started really be more tricky. But still, at Midjourney, you can find XML list with over 2,000 artists, most of them which are still alive, and they don't want to be in this sheet, and they are still here.
So I also sorry to interrupt. I'd like to bring it back to a question, not so much a question, but a statement in the chat. And you mentioned prompt writing and what is in the prompt of what you are generating. And it brings me to this comment, again from Freeze B. I think as an artist, the smart thing to do is to try to embrace the technology and to try to find a way to use it in a way to improve your own work. I feel like a lot of artists are trying to fight it. I'm thinking in terms of prompt writing. I had someone come up to me, like a couple of weeks ago, asking, for example, like, do you think that teaching prompt writing for an AI model could be a skill that is taught to students or something to be attained? I know it may sound like a little bit of a silly question, but it is something that I've heard quite a few times at this point. So, Dries, go right ahead.
I don't think you should teach that per se. It's something you'll figure out yourself if you actually are interested in it. I can do you one better. You can buy prompt generators that generate specific prompts for your Midjourney art generation, and it's always like roughly the same kind of prompt, and then it like generates interesting variations on stuff. So it goes extremely deep, the rabbit hole. Should we teach our students prompt writing? That's a good question. I don't think so right now. It's not that hard to figure out, really. If you spend like an hour or two reading through the documentation and some websites,
Yeah.
you'll get the gist of it. It's not that difficult. I don't think we should teach it. If you really want to know it, you'll figure it out yourself. I think what it really, for me, like I already said, just don't fight it. It's a battle you can't win. The technology exists, right? It's not gonna go away. No matter how much you don't like it, it's gonna be there. And I also agree. There's definitely ethical qualms about it, but learn to work with it and learn to understand how you can use it, because like nobody cares that you don't use it. That's the thing. Well, I mean that's not exactly true. I agree. People do care that you use it, but in the end of the day, like the fight is going to be lost because the technology exists, and it's not going to go away. That's what I think is the most scary part as well of it.
Yasmin, you wanted to add something as well?
No, I just wanted to say that for me, it's about getting to know these tools and maybe use them for inspiration for mood boards. But I think I have qualms about it, mostly about the ethical use of the data that was used to train this. So I'm like, maybe choose models that you would rather have the students use as well. Or, anyways, that was just something. And what's funny is that prompt writing, it's the same as learning how to use Google actually to efficiently find
Yes.
you
I
know
completely
stuff. So
agree.
I
Yes.
think it could
Absolutely.
be if they're interested of maybe if there are some assignments like let's do a work of art and they want to use it for their own mood boards, they could like discover it on their own. Yeah.
Do you see or have you heard of education institutions already utilizing these technologies? This is just out of my own curiosity. Have we seen this already being used, already being instated in education?
We have.
Could you elucidate?
Yes, yeah, we have had assignments that were like, oh, here's 100 different tiny cute cars. Choose one and make a 3D model. Like you have to hand make a 3D model out of it, so that they're all like in a random cute style, and then they have to make a render out of it. That's things that happen for example, if there's an environment that needs to be created. I'm also using some randomly generated environments for them if they wanted like 2D images of environments, if they want to get inspired by that to build their environments from that. Yeah, it's the same thing as going on ArtStation and getting inspired by all the concept art out there. And I don't necessarily think we should only use, for example, generated environments to then have them make those. I don't think we should do that. But having the option out there and show them like, okay, this is also something that's out there. It's also something that exists, something you need to learn to work with, because it could be possible that in 5 years from now, when you, or like in 3 years from now, when you graduate and you go work in a company, that it's standard for that indie company that they just generate their environment concepts and then you have to make them 3D art out of it. So you're gonna have to learn to work with it. And I think that's where this kind of technology is going to be way more prevalent, right? If you think about indie companies, if they don't have to hire 3 concept artists, they can just go with a half-time concept artist that just mainly works with some generated AI and then go from there, and then base their own style on there. I think that's where you need to learn what the kind of stuff that you need to learn to work with as a for example 3D artist or sculptor or things like that, or an environment artist. So yeah, that's how I use it, and that's how some of my other colleagues have used generative art.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to know because I think we're having a lot of these discussions. But yeah, I'm interested in also seeing it or hearing about it, how it's being used in real time, and also the positive implications of the technology as well.
Yes, we've always used it as inspiration for certain assignments, right? Never as like here's an AI generator and I'll make art with it, because I think that kind of misses the mark. I think it's more, like I said, useful to use as inspiration for our students to then actually make handcrafted work with.
Yeah.
Glenn, go ahead.
Maybe on the topic of the way it's being used. I mean, if it's important to realize that this thing has been around for what is essentially a year. So how it's being used in education, well, I don't think it's being used much yet. I mean, in the capacity that you mentioned, yes, but not being taught, let's say. As to like companies using this, I think some definitely are. But I think we're going to see that over the next year or two in talks at GDC or in other places. That's when we're going to see like how this is actually being adopted, and I think it's just right now it's too early to tell. It's just again it's really been accessible for a year, which is not that much.
And I think it's also interesting to note that's also why we pushed this topic back a month. Originally this topic was supposed to be March, and as I mentioned before, even the week that we were on holiday, it already seemed like there were advancements. So every week, I mean, I think the landscape is changing. So hence us moving this topic to now, because we just couldn't wait to cover it. I see also an interesting comment in the chat from the Lunicorn. They state, and now I just lost the comment. Yes, prompt writing is not a skill, but having an extensive library is important to learn. If you only know 3 art styles and 1 subculture, all of your AI art will be very boring. ... So I think that also speaks to the importance of learning these fundamental skills within education and leveraging this technology for mood boards.
Yeah,
inspiration.
It's exactly like you said, right, Lilia? It's you need to have a good visual library as an artist. If you don't have that, you're gonna get stuck in the same thing over and over again, even with AI generated tools, because you still need to write the prompts for them. So
Yeah. At least you have to understand for what you're referencing.
exactly.
I see also in the chat a question. Big game companies are staying away from the use of generative AI tools until IP issues are solved. So I see the mention of big game companies. I wonder if there is a discrepancy or a difference between the way that the bigger game companies are viewing this than, say, independent or indie spaces. Is there a difference in the way that this technology is being viewed or maybe leveraged?
I really think so. Like, bigger companies have the means and resources to train their own models, make their own data sets to feed into those models, work entirely with in-house IP for that kind of stuff, versus a small company that exists out of 5 people just does not have the manpower to do that, and they are basically limited to whatever commercially available generator is out there if they are going to keep existing, if we take a look at how these court cases are going. So I think that is where the main difference lies, is how these big companies can put a team of 20, 30 AI engineers on there and basically create a 3D model generator for their own in-house use. And those things will not become public because they're too valuable to those companies, I think.
That's really fun. That's the first thing you thought about. It's how to implement artificial intelligence team inside a big game company. Instead, just to ignore it. Of course, still big companies use inspiration from copyrighted stuff. I mean, each artist could go to Pinterest and check some things. And the same he can do it with artificial intelligence. But if we are talking about the whole teams, especially if it would be engineer teams who making an art assets based on these unethical models, company could get sued for such incredible amount of lawsuits.
But what if like, let's say this company, they hire 15 concept artists. These concept artists make concept art for the company. Company takes that concept art, feeds it into an AI model that they made themselves, and then generates more concept art out of that concept art. All of that entire pipeline is entirely in-house, right? So nothing they did
No way.
No.
Just
I
sorry.
can
That's
explain.
not going to
I'm
happen.
sorry. I'm gonna pass it over to Glenn.
Okay.
Yeah.
He has an answer to
The
that.
amount of data
Yeah,
you need for
that's
that
true.
is
Not
just
enough.
not going to happen.
Not
That's true.
enough.
Yeah.
It's billions of
Uh,
data. So
It's
then you
also
can fine tune, but you can like never
Yeah.
get
Okay.
as good with just 15 or
Okay.
100.
yeah, and even if, for example, they would use an ethical model, for example, you hired all of this team and they train it to make great labyrinths for a runner, for example, and then game designer suddenly told like, "Oh, I want a temple." And artificial intelligence generated created to make all of this walls and tunnels will not be able to make something totally different, or for example turn it into the jungle. You need this concept art team again. Just for the real tasks, usually you don't require so many art to make the whole game. You can check art books for the games, and usually art books contains almost all art was produced to create the entire game, and it's not so many visual information you need for it. Yeah.
I see. I want to move on to another question. I unfortunately see that, as expected, time absolutely flew by. I think we could continue the stream for a few more hours. Unfortunately, time and the day does not work that way. But I do see another interesting question from It's Gur. As previously mentioned, human art would likely become a luxury. That's an interesting assumption. I want to hear your responses to that, lovely panelists. How do you see this affecting consumers when human-made art is specifically tailored for the wealthy? I think if human-made art would specifically then be tailored for the wealthy.
Yeah. Let's pull this. Let's pull this technology like 20, 30 years into the future, right? Like even trying to imagine what is possible there is difficult. I like to I like to bring it to a game that I really like, Cyberpunk. One of the parts of the lore of that game is, because it's in the future and it's cyberpunk, it's dark dystopian. One of the parts of the lore of that game is music. For the most part, like 90% of music consumed in the world is AI generated because AI makes it. But there's still some artists out there that are backed by big media machines and have personas and go on stage and stuff like that. And I think that's an interesting comparison. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I do think it's an interesting road, that one of many possibilities that could happen is that yes, there is going to be a lot of AI generated art, because at certain points it's just going to become so good that there's almost just no competition there anymore. But I do think there will always be a certain space for handcrafted art as well. Just like there's will always be space for handcrafted music, just like there will always be a space for hand assembled cars, how there will always be a space for handcrafted furniture. So yeah, I don't know.
I think
When we think about, and Glenn, like the extent to which this handcrafted art is utilized, and like wanted by consumers, I think like the extent to which it will be part of the story for me is a big piece. Go ahead, Glenn, and then Yasmin, I see you want to say something as well.
Maybe just to respond to that question specifically, right? So it was about human art becoming a luxury, and arguably, I would say it already is, because only like the 1% of people are able to create the artwork of that level. All it's going to do is it's going to make that art more generally more accessible to more people. I think that it doesn't change that much in that respect.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I think real artist amateurs that know art, respect art, like artists as well, I think they will still have followers for that. And I can already see that in the way we consume and enjoy art. I mean, with Patreons to support artists I like, with them also. But so forced by algorithms. So we could talk about algorithms making artists' life difficult all we want. but
Another
making
stream.
shorts, and we can see the process. So I found that interesting as someone who consume art. I mean, buy art from artists and stuff. But I'm like, yeah, maybe AI can also copy process videos. So who knows in the future if we'll only have videos from AI, and that would be such a shame. But for sure, I think there is a niche even today. But for sure, when we think about artists working in the industry and making money out of it this way, maybe it will be more and more difficult to live of
Yeah,
only
actually,
Lilia,
for an
artistic
artist, it
creation.
changed it already. I mean, a lot of my, for example, friends who are working with miniatures and sculptures and with art, especially with the sculptures, they just start to make their own pet projects in clay. And the same with, for example, for now, a lot of people are telling like, oh my God, which quality we could achieve in the 5-10 closest years with AI generative art. But the tiny problem is that the top leaders of the art industry, for example, one of art directors from Riot Games, he just removed all his stuff from the network where he was successful, and that happened for a lot of artists. Like, we still have Patreon, and some of artists turned it to subscribe emails, subscribing. So for now, this art like totally closed and it's opened only for general people, and a lot of artists also decide to go to general marketing, so they started to post works online,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they
but also a bit
decide
big
to
trap.
pay for an advertising. And that means that for scribing you need high quality art, but high quality art slowly removing from the internet because the people who can
Yeah,
achieve this top quality, they don't want to share it.
but maybe
Yeah,
there'll be
no.
museums, or I don't know. I mean, maybe it will go back to being, not from a distance, but in real life.
The
I
thing
think
for me is like, let's take a look at ArtStation, for example, right? There was a whole upheaval with like different waves of anti-art propaganda, anti-AI propaganda on the front page, with all the thumbnails being changed to that, and like it was a few weeks where there's just nothing but that, right? That's now gone, right? And in my opinion, like, okay, there's definitely some high-profile artists that said, "Screw this, I quit the platform and I go somewhere else." But the quality of the front page is still the same, right? It's still, and even if, let's say, 50% of all those really good artists say, "I never post anything online anymore," there's still gonna be a ton of really good art online. So I don't think there's the amount of people removing their art from the internet is, I don't think, gonna make that big of a difference.
the impact is very minimal.
Yes, I think
Yeah,
I
but
think
It's just
it's
such a small portion.
Lilia, do you want to share further about that?
yeah, of course we just will see how it's turned out.
Yeah, and plus, I still feel like the artist community is a small one if you're part of it. So for me, it has a big impact, even if it's a few artists. It's still a signal, and okay, you
Yep.
can argue we still have quality art, but I still feel like it's sad because I like the
Yeah,
art
and then
community. And
also the
there's
question
some
is, what
artists
is
there's some artists that I really liked that removed themselves from ArtStation, and that's sad. That's true. I would have liked to see more, but now they're gone. Okay, but yeah, then and a year from now they'll be replaced by 30 other artists. It's just a
yeah, and
sad
then
reality about the sheer volume of things that happen online.
I think also we have to ask ourselves then, what defines quality art? Because Dries, you said still on the front page is quality. There's still a lot of quality art on there. I think then we have to ask ourselves, like, what is quality art?
and is it
And
Is it good
effective?
enough?
does a couple artists leaving ArtStation, like, does the number matter, or does the that act itself, that people are leaving ArtStation, does that
I
matter?
mean, that is a
Or the
signal,
number
right?
of-
That's a signal that they're leaving. Them leaving is the signal, like, hey, maybe we should think about this. And we are, right? This discussion is happening, right? We are having this
Yeah.
discussion. The courts are having this discussion. So people are aware, and discussion is happening, and we are gonna move forward with this as a society. Where exactly we don't have a crystal ball to see where it's gonna go, but there's things that are gonna change. And the signal was given. That is very clear. But yeah,
Maybe
whether
Honestly,
or
I'm
not
not so sure
to
because
pitch
I
in.
don't really see artists being involved in, tech teams, but it's good
And
that
I
you believe
think,
so, but I think there should be more stuff to be
yeah,
done.
that, Yasmin, also, you're again a perfect segue into what I'm about to say next. Unfortunately, I see that we are out of time for this evening. My final question, and a parting question to you all as well. What next? What do you advise? What do you advise people that are engaging with art, engaging with these AI generative models? What do you suggest? And what do we suggest? How do you suggest we navigate this? What should we do about this in the coming weeks, months, years?
Okay,
It's a
I
hefty
can.
question. Go
Yeah,
right ahead.
I will answer first. So, my proposal is just wait until lawsuits will be finished and all pacts and acts and manifest about artificial intelligence will be written down and published. And after it, we can tell what's happening, what will happen next.
So the crucial nature of the legal aspect you
Yeah,
touch on, Lilia.
yeah.
And what would you suggest? Also, what would you suggest to the artists out there that are also, thinking about this on a somewhat regular basis?
Yeah, of course, it's nice to understand the technology itself. Like, it's nice to check it and understand how it works because it's quite easy to check and understand how it works. Like, it costs its time, several days, and if you want to dive a bit more into exactly data scientist articles and topics like that really far. But the principles for work as a concept artist and the same with a 2D artist, I mean marketing and other people, that we are creating something that mentioned the subject matter, the most important, and company which understand why it's important, they will continue using artist artwork nevertheless because it's give you proper and predictable results. So just continue studying.
All right, just continue studying. To all our students out there, you heard it here. Awesome. All right, Dries, what's next?
Yeah, what is next? I think one of the most important things really is keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. Don't be too reactive, I'd say. Don't just wait until things are decided for you. Like, understand the technology, try to dabble in it, understand how it works so that you can form your own opinion about it. And yeah, don't fight it is, I think, one of the biggest things that you should avoid, because that's a battle you will lose. Try to find the positives in it. Try to find the ways that you can use it to accelerate your own artwork, but also be aware of the ethical implications of what you're doing, and think critically about those kinds of things. That's also what Jasmine said earlier, right? That's critical thinking about how you use AI generative art is not unimportant. But also don't just be a naysayer is what I think the most important thing here. Understand that this technology is here, understand how it works, and try to see the positive and understand the ethical negatives.
Mm,
All
so
right,
we're talking.
Yasmin, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to wrap it up. we're talking about students, right? So I totally get your two point of views. I wanted to take a more personal approach as a maybe hobbyist artist. I felt really like struggling with these new AI generators because why I want to make art is basically to express myself and to be proud of what I create. So of course, when you can encounter a generative AI, you're like, oh, does it really matter that I draw or some stuff? So if you're having troubles like mentally, like you if it sickens you and you don't feel like using it, well, it's fine too. You're right, but it's true that I agree with Dries that you shouldn't fight it, but you should get into the discussion and like there's open space here to talk. So just talk with other people, understand different point of views. It's important because we live in an era of disruption for sure, and you have to live in it too. And I'd say think strategically after the lawsuits have been done for, and feel free to expand your creativity and expand your skills because I believe human skill set will always bring you farther than just tools. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to say here, even if I don't bring anything new.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Glenn, I leave you with the final word. What's next? How should we navigate this?
Personally, I agree a lot with Dries on this. I think whether you ethically have problems with this technology or not, it's important to keep your eye on it and to at least try it to understand the way it works. I think that as with everything, just being informed is key here. I've seen a lot of discourse online about how this is just packaging AI, packaging artworks into a really compressed form and things like that. I think it's key to really just try and understand the way this works and have an informed discussion about this. And yeah, I mean, if this stuff is going to get implemented in the future, try it at the very least so you understand how it works, and that if you need to use it in the future, specifically for our students, that you've at least messed around with it at least once. Yeah, I think that's
all
pretty much
right.
it.
Thank you so much to our panelists, Glenn, Lilia, Dries, and Yasmin. Thank you so much for joining and really and honestly and transparently and also in a very nuanced way expressing your thoughts and opinions about this and also your experiences. We really appreciate it. Very valid points all throughout the evening. Can we get some love in the chat for our panelists this evening? Yes. Thank you for the stream. Very informative and fun. Yes, indeed. Thank you, panelists. And thank you, all of you out there on Twitch, for watching this evening. We really hope that you took something away from the discussion. And as repeated over and over again, this technology, it's here. So it's time to learn about this, to open up a space for discussion about it. And that is the very importance of having a discussion like this one within Game for Thought. So I'm glad that we were able to tackle this topic already this month. Stick around. We have some closing words right after our DIE trailer. Stick around for more information about our next live stream and how you can get involved. Hang on just a couple more minutes and we will be right back. Again, thank you so much, panelists. Love in the chat. See you soon, everyone. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's Game for Thought, first one of 2023. So I think we kicked it off on a vibrant note. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists, Glenn, Yasmin, Lilia, and Dries. Thank you to everyone in the chat. And also thank you to our tech guy for the evening and all of the streams as of late, Casper. Big claps and love also for Casper in the chat as well. Thank you to Master Chief Rick for making Game for Thought possible, and all of the Game for the DIE colleagues who are also supporting this initiative. And Ethics at DIE, thanks to Quindo, and also especially the Flemish Audio Visual Fund for supporting us here. Make sure to tune in next month. Already mark it in your calendars, the 15th of March, where we will be discussing also an important topic, community building and community management in digital entertainment. Thank you for tuning in with us. We'd love to continue this discussion on our LinkedIn. So also make sure to go ahead and follow Game for Thought on LinkedIn. With that, have a wonderful evening, and we can't wait to see you next month for yet another stream. Happy 2023, and we will see you soon. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for joining.